Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. It's great that you're all here to join us. So Professor Eller is a Associate Professor of Latin American and Caribbean History and teaches courses in colonial and modern Latin American and Caribbean history, Caribbean political thought, imperialism, Atlantic history, and African diaspora. She is a former Fulbright Hays Scholar, and her work has been supported by multiple research and writing fellowships. Eller's first book, We Dream Together, Dominican Independence, Haiti, and the Fight for Caribbean Freedom, focuses on the reoccupation of Dominican Republic in Spain in 1861, as well as the popular anti-colonial movement that followed. This year, we are fortunate that she is leading a seminar titled The Long Fight for a Free Caribbean, 1700s to 1959. So welcome, Anne, and thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I wish that we could be together in person. I'm just going to give you a few thoughts about the course, some of which are already in the description of the course, so it will just underscore that a little bit. So as you can see from the dates of the course, we're jumping right in. We're not thinking about pre-contact or necessarily indigenous societies, but really focusing on the plantation complex. And the idea of that is so that this class can be easily relevant to fellows who are also just teaching the North American context, as well as other parts of Latin America, because the questions that we'll raise in the class are general questions about race making, about bondage, about colonialism, and about freedom struggles, and then the new rounds of capitalism. So the idea for the class is that it really hits on two major revolutions: the Haitian Revolution, which takes place from 1791 to 1804, or arguably you could stretch it way deeper into the 1700s, and then the buildup, but not the actual advent of the Cuban Revolution, through which we can talk a lot about post-slavery lives in the Caribbean and the new entry of capitalism and the relationship between the United States and Latin America, and very particularly the Caribbean. So my hope is that there will be some social studies fellows who will be in there making with discussions that are just really easily directly relevant to this material, but it is also intended to be very inviting to language arts fellows, because among the readings, I will definitely add primary sources in Spanish and French. I'm open to adding them in other languages too. That could be another discussion. But in terms of the ones that I'm planning to bring, those were the two principal ones. And we can look at many, many works of literature as well. In terms of novels, there are a few that I'm thinking about in the course of Haitian history that could be directly relevant to some of the fellows. So among the questions that we'll ask that are relevant to history and literature and discussions elsewhere in the hemisphere, I first think that we will have a grounding text so that fellows who are arriving to the course with little or no background in Caribbean history will feel totally comfortable. It's quite new, so even if you already have an extensive background in Caribbean history, this might also be of interest to you. I'm not sure if you can get that all on screen, but it's this beautiful, the question of how to write a summary text of Caribbean history has been attacked from so many different angles, and is usually an anthology or a very boring overview. This is not that. It's called Freedom Roots, and it sort of weaves and tacks in and out of different events and plays with scale. It's very beautifully written. So this will serve as a foundational text so that fellows who have differing backgrounds can come to the same collection of questions and feel comfortable in doing so. But then our readings from week to week will take on big questions of methodology rather than just content, although there will also, of course, be content. So I'm going to bring the all-stars in terms of reading really exciting scholarship about plantation slavery and freedom struggles in the past. It's going to probably tend to fairly recent work. So that will probably include chapters. I'm luckily, being home, I have access to all my favorites right here. So I yanked a couple off the shelf. So we'll have a chapter from a book like this, in which she thinks about the lives of women who are enslaved and the limits of evidence. We will have a chapter that thinks a lot about just trees, one that thinks about sexuality and the contests of emancipation. And because our class moves from slavery into the period following slavery, there's lots of resonance with United States history and all of the things that have made headlines in recent weeks about these controversies and revisionism about Reconstruction. And about oppression that followed the period of slavery. And so there are some really interesting texts about that think about what is the meaning of freedom? How did people make freedom when it's being denied to them juridically, and also in terms of land tenure, even in terms of sexuality and respectability. There are just so many really, really rich things that we can discuss. And so my idea in focusing the readings principally on 2 islands is not at all to limit the fellows to think that they could not write and create projects about any Caribbean island that they feel like, or arguably any plantation or post-plantation setting that they feel like. I invite scholars who want to think and write about North American context. We can make this a greater Caribbean, but rather just so that our readings in class, you can feel a little bit grounded in a certain context. And also because those 2 islands, what is now Haiti and the Dominican Republic and Cuba, have produced such really, really, really rich literature. So we will tack in and out of major questions about cultural and political formations as they are arrived and are remade during slavery from West and Central Africa into the Americas. That's another beautiful example of a burgeoning body of literature that just gets richer every year, and for which fellows who are principally thinking about North American context can also really come in. So this is one of my favorites. It's called Exchanging Our Country Marks, and is actually a North American example. But I also think we're going to read a little bit about what is now known as Vodou, Sévillois, spiritual and resistance practices in the context of Saint-Domingue. So that's really the intention. Through the course, as you probably saw in the description, you can see that we're thinking about these really big questions about liberation contests, about food security, about fighting for meaningful political power, about what is the meaning of nation and what is the meaning of national independence. And so we're really going to move beyond not just these questions in many contexts and in the context that you feel developing, but also, of course, within Caribbean history to explode all of those myths, paradigms that I'm sure you're already tired about, but of paradise, of a place where no labor happened. And so without being too teleological, we will look at, how this ends up from this one enormous world historical revolution into the beginnings of another world historical revolution. And I think that's all we'll have time for in about 12 weeks. But I really look forward to being in discussion with you about any of these topics. My own scholarship focuses on not a non-plantation space, because I don't actually think that's a thing, but a plantation adjacent space in the 1800s with really, really sparse records. So in my own work, I'm very interested in fragments of poetry and song and oral history. I'm really omnivorous in terms of what I consider to be historical evidence. And so I look forward to really thinking about method and any number of places with you, whichever project that you choose to develop. I think that's pretty much an overview of what I hope to offer. I will just say, reiterate that in terms of expansiveness, I look forward to talking about also North American and Latin American topics as well. So thank you.
Thank you. That was very helpful, and it really expanded very nicely on your description. And actually, the first question we had, you've already responded to, which was specific texts that you might be using. So that was very helpful to not only hear them, but to actually see the covers and have an idea of what they are. And is that something that we can know about ahead of time? Are those titles that we can?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Okay. That was another question that popped in. And so you mentioned poetry and lyrics and music, and do you imagine teachers of art might
I would be thrilled
okay.
to work with scholars of art. So I as a leader, I would approach this with like support and context, but I can think of really, really rich art historiography that thinks about, for example, Congo cosmologies in the context of Saint-Domingue. So depending on what that fellow is interested in and the time period, there are texts thinking about the importance of bébés, the importance of these spiritual pictograms within the complex of Vodou as they relate to the revolutionary process. I mean, there's everything you could want about that. And there's actually a scholar at Yale, Cécile Faumont, who publishes on that regularly. So I could easily see that coming in. And in terms of the dialogic relationship between the multiple islands, Wilfredo Lam is a Cuban painter who represented the Haitian Revolution repeatedly within actually the not so strict chronological parameters of our course. And it's so multi-layered, the way that one can analyze his works for what is an intro-Caribbean conversation, but nevertheless has all these layers of othering. I would be thrilled to talk about that with a fellow.
Great. And one final question. The use of folktales from the region and, for younger students to start to appreciate that area and some history of that area, do you see that as a potential?
That is so interesting. I'm writing this down. Okay, so that is something I am somewhat familiar with Anansi and other famous figures from some of the British islands. I am less familiar with it in the context of Saint-Domingue, and so with this idea of preparation, I'll take a look prior to finalizing the syllabus. The thinking that I was talking about with oral history and collected histories in my own scholarship often looks like histories of place rather than children's folk tales. So you'll get parables, or you'll get this sort of really rambling across time description of a very small town with no footnotes. And so that's a sort of document that when it's all you have, it's really interesting to sort of sit and think of what you can make about it. So that obviously is methodologically interesting to multiple levels, but in terms of thinking more for our fellows who are working in primary school, I would have to do some separate preparation to make sure that I had some children's material as well.